Mr. Terry Patchett.
This morning I presided at a meeting of the Cabinet and had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others.
Mr. Patchett.
Has the Prime Minister seen reports this morning of the Italian cargo vessel Carambi returning to Britain with the cargo of toxic waste? And because of grave public anxiety on this matter, will it ensure that under no circumstances will this ship be allowed into any British port with its deadly cargo?
I can certainly say to the honourable gentleman that waste will only be allowed into this country if it's safe to treat them. We will certainly apply that principle to the Caranby and its cargo.
Sir Ian Lloyd.
Does the Prime Minister agree that in the nuclear weapons age, the much-pilloried phrase, careless talk costs lives, could represent a dramatic understatement of the consequences? If so, would he agree that the intolerable position in which Admiral Sir Tom Woodward was put in a public discussion on television early yesterday morning by the Right Honourable Member for Chesterfield does represent a very serious threat, in particular as the Right Honourable Member for Chesterfield asks that the relationship between the President of the United States and the British use of nuclear weapons should be brought out into the open? Does the Prime Minister agree that this really does indicate the importance of the existing convention applying to this matter?
It is, of course, an important convention, but I must say to my honourable friend that I did not myself see the interview and would prefer not to comment too directly upon it.
Is the Prime Minister aware that Admiral Woodward was a lot more candid than ministers have been about nuclear weapons in the Gulf? But is he not also aware that there is very widespread anxiety in this country now about the extension of the war aims well beyond the UN objectives in relation to Kuwait, the possibility of the extension of the war, and will he not welcome the initiative of the French government in going to Tehran to see whether at this late stage some progress might be made by negotiation leading to a ceasefire?
I repeat to the Right Honourable Gentleman, I did not see the interview with Admiral Woodward, and I have no comment on that. Insofar as war aims are concerned, I've made clear consistently that our aims are those set out in the United Nations Security Council resolutions. That is and remains the situation.
Bill? Would my right honourable friend find time today to consider the somewhat fragile political climate in South Africa following the very welcome meeting of reconciliation between Chief Buthelezi and Mr. Nelson Mandela? And would he say what action Her Majesty's government can now take to encourage the nations of the world to take a more positive attitude towards South Africa in order to encourage that country faster and further down the road to reform that we all want to see?
I very much welcome the meeting that's taking place between Chief Buthelezi and Mr. Mandela. I think it's an extremely welcome development. As my honourable friend will know, the European Community nations lifted the investment sanction some time ago because of the progress that has been made. If, as I hope, further progress on dismantling apartheid is made soon, I hope that we will also see a further gesture, both from the European Community, the United States, and from the Commonwealth concerning the lifting of sanctions.
Sir David Steele.
I refer the Right Honourable Gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
David Steele.
After the Gulf War, and bearing in mind what was done after the Falklands War, will the Prime Minister consider the setting up of a high-level inquiry into the acquisition of British arms and technology by Iraq, including private companies, quangos and government departments, so that lessons may be learned and that never again will our forces be faced with an enemy partly armed by ourselves?
I think there is a considerable degree of sensitivity about the supply of arms equipment. As the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, for some considerable time we have not supplied arms to Iraq for precisely that reason, and we will take great care in the future to ensure that we are careful about that matter.
James Spicer.
My right honourable friend agree with me that the record of loyalty and service to NATO of the Republic of Turkey in the last 45 years, and also to the UN in Korea and also now to the UN endeavours in the Gulf is worthy of great praise and ought to be looked at very carefully by other NATO members and also by members of the European Community.
Turkey certainly have a distinguished record in NATO, and I'm happy to acknowledge that fact.
Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister take this opportunity to confirm that any interest rate rise in Britain in response to today's rise in German interest rates would be absolutely disastrous for British industry?
As the right honourable gentleman knows, we will set interest rates and we will reduce interest rates when we think it is appropriate. As the right honourable gentleman knows, we have made our position perfectly clear on the subject of interest rates. When it is appropriate to reduce them, and in the interests of the economy to reduce them and see the reduction be sustained, then we will then take action.
Mr. Kinnock.
Mr. Speaker, the government has been telling us that they've been curing inflation for years. Isn't it the case that they've always made the mistake of combating inflation only with high interest rates, with the result that they've hit investment? How does he expect this country to become more competitive in advance of the completion of the single market if all the time he's wearing down investment, skills, training and the other things essential to enable Britain to compete?
The right honourable gentleman should know that as our inflation differential with the European community narrows, we will then be in a position to reduce interest rates. The right honourable gentleman, who invariably advocates the cutting of interest rates, might recall he also advocated the further cutting of interest rates in 1987, and had we then followed his advice, we would have faced a far greater problem today than the one before us.
The Prime Minister would have great difficulty in saying to anyone that he would get greater difficulties than 1,000 redundancies a day, a reduction in output, a reduction in investment, and the highest interest rates in the developed world.
If the right honourable gentleman is really serious about seeing Britain's success in the 1990s, then he needs to bear in mind that we need to get inflation down to the rate of our competitors. We are prepared to take the action to do so. I regret the right honourable gentleman, as ever, wants the soft option.
Mr. James Cran. Mr. Cran, number 3.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Cran.
Honourable friend not agree that the contribution made by Germany to British war expenses yesterday was extremely welcome? And could he give an indication to the House whether he can expect contributions from any other source?
I certainly agree with my honourable friend that the further contribution of some 275 million in sterling from Germany is very welcome indeed, and so also is the offer to provide some military material. I spoke to Chancellor Kohl this morning and was able to thank him for the German people's generosity.
Sylvia Heel.
Mr. Speaker, by honourable members of this House who happen to be all women, to the wives of the servicemen serving in the Gulf, I wonder if the Prime Minister would take this opportunity of writing a letter of support to those wives, many of whom are feeling very isolated and very lonely. I wonder if he would agree to do that, and also if he would agree to a delegation of those wives coming to Westminster to speak to the members of this House and explain to them what their difficulties and their feelings are while they too are supporting their husbands serving in the Gulf.
I certainly agree with the Honourable Lady about the remarkable contribution made by the wives of our servicemen. I hope very shortly to have the opportunity of visiting a number of the wives in Germany myself, and I look forward to that. I will be happy to send the letter the Honourable Lady suggests.
John Burris.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Burris.
Does my right honourable friend agree that there can be few worse examples of the inhumanity of Saddam Hussein than his cruelty to the prisoners of war and their families by refusing access to them by the International Red Cross? And will he do everything in his power to assure that that access is achieved?
Assure my honourable friend we're certainly doing that. The action by the Iraqis in refusing access is quite intolerable and wholly unforgivable. We are in daily touch with the Red Cross in Geneva and are doing our best to support their efforts. I shall myself be meeting the President of the Red Cross early next week.
Mr. Lewis.
The honourable gentleman to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Does the Prime Minister share my view that it's obscene that coalition forces in the Gulf have their lives threatened by arms and weapons that are supplied probably by their own families that have made them in... Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Supplied by weapons made by their own families back in their own countries. And will he give an unequivocal assurance today that he will take this country out of the international arms trade, which includes training of personnel from these countries and also technical know-how?
The obscenity that exists really lies in Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. And the sooner the honourable gentleman recognises that, the better.
Stephen Day, number 6.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Day.
The honourable friend agree with me that whilst Iraq's invasion of Kuwait was an act of naked aggression, Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza has been brought about as a result of decades of Arab intolerance of the State of Israel. And that because of these two very different scenarios, that there should be no linkage at any future date.
It certainly is clear that the situation is different, because in 1967 it was, of course, Israel itself that was attacked. But I think we now do have to look to the future and a solution to the Arab-Israel problem, but based on territory for peace. Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, of course, has made that task much more difficult. But as I have said to the House on a number of occasions in recent weeks, we will certainly be looking to see if we can bring that peace forward as soon as this conflict is over.
James Molyneux.
In regard to the invasion of Kuwait, does the Prime Minister share my admiration for the prompt response of the senior members of the Commonwealth? And does the Prime Minister share my hope that those ties with the Commonwealth will endure long after various temporary entanglements have disappeared?
I most certainly do, without qualification.
Mr. Neil Thorne.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Thorne.
On the basis that justice delayed is justice denied, would my right honourable friend, in his usual caring fashion, be kind enough to look at the question of the efficiency of the courts to see whether or not it's right that people, particularly from abroad, should be obliged to wait so long for their trial, such as Mrs. Dina Latal, the American wife of a surgeon, aged 29, who responded to muggers on the underground and has been prosecuted for what she did. She's now been waiting 3 months for her trial, and is this not...
Is this case sub judice? I think the honourable member should bear that in mind. Yes.
I certainly understand the point my honourable friend makes. The government is concerned, of course, to reduce to a minimum delay in all criminal cases.
Yes, Mr. Mick Martin.
Mr. Speaker, sir, can I say to the Prime Minister that he will know that many of the soldiers who are serving well in the Gulf are in the army because they couldn't get jobs in Civvy Street. Can I say this? When the Gulf War is over, there will be soldiers who will be unfortunately unfit for army service. Can he guarantee them jobs in Glasgow and in the north of England?
I think the early parts of the honourable gentleman's remarks will be widely resented by many of our forces in the Gulf. And I must say to the honourable gentleman, I heard no talk of employment for him during the 40 successive months it was falling.
Mr. Richard Page, number 8.
I refer my honourable friend to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Richard Page.
Friend is now receiving from those that wish to see extensions to the sanction period in the Gulf calls to bring about a ceasefire. Could my right honourable friend surmise to the House why those people are trying to put our troops into extra danger by giving Saddam Hussein the breathing space to develop a nuclear weapon?
I agree with my honourable friend. He makes a valid point. And I must say to the House, we are not interested in a pause or a ceasefire which simply enables Iraq to regroup, resupply its forces and place our troops in greater peril. The conflict that exists over Kuwait and will only be concluded when all the provisions of the Security Council Resolution 678 have been met.
Statement, Mr. Secretary.